panel on blockchain and all the exciting things happening in the field. You'll be listening to the experts shortly in various fields who are able moderators here. Just before we dive into the panel, real quick, we are the Hive. The Hive is an incubator, it's a funding entity and a company co-creation studio. We're based out of Palo Alto. The Hive is not only an incubator and can you guys hear me now? Okay, thanks. Yeah, so we invest into companies that are primarily disrupting the data space and applications and use cases. So that's where our primary focus is. And blockchain is one of our new areas that we are focused in. Apart from us incubating and investing, we also hold a think tank, and which is what we're hosting these events, and we have about 7,000 people physically touched who are part of our think tank program. And we host events every Wednesday, and some of our events have about 700 people in attendance. Next slide. I'd like to thank our partners and sponsors, mostly our Plug and Play, who's our host today for hosting this great event with full attendance here. Okay. I would bore with you guys, so I'll just quickly call Fabio, which is Panelist is a company that we've invested recently into blockchain. But before that, please be part of the conversation. Our Twitter hashtag is Hive Data, and please tweet about the event and what you feel about the blockchain. Thank you. Over to Fabio.
Right. Well, yeah, thanks a lot, first of all, for everybody to be here tonight. And yeah, we're basically the Hive's first blockchain startup that they've invested in. We're very excited to be part of the Hive and Hive family almost. So we're co-located with the Hive in Palo Alto, and so what Panelist does is on the next slide. We're basically an end-to-end intelligence platform on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. So how many here know what the blockchain is? Well, that's not too bad. Great, so basically we help companies understand transactions on the blockchain. We help them get easy access to the blockchain data, query transactions, and then understand what those transactions mean. And mostly we're helping companies in compliance, anti-money laundering, risk assessment of transactions at the moment. Next slide. So yeah, we offer APIs, visual interfaces for companies to interact with the data, extract that information, and then most importantly, take action. So, yeah. And finally, yeah, we're hiring. So now that we got some money from the Hive, we need to put it to action. So if you have experience with Spark or data science, we would really love to talk to you. Come to talk to us at the booth back there. And also we're looking for full stack web application developers. So yeah, please come talk to us. Thanks a lot.
So welcome everybody. My name is Peter Kirby. I'm going to be moderating this panel and take it over for Scott.
Why don't I steal this and everybody can actually hear me? So my name is Peter Kirby. I'm taking over for Scott moderating this panel. And the goal here tonight is to discuss Bitcoin, blockchain, and some of the most interesting things that are going on in the technological space. We have an amazing panel of experts this evening. I'm going to go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves and give us basically a sentence about what you're up to. I think that's going to be much, much better than me trying to introduce all of you.
I don't know if I can do it in a sentence. I apologize. And I apologize for being late. If anybody's working on teleportation, I'd like to talk to you after the meeting.
Second.
So I'm president of Zappo. Zappo was founded by Alexis Cazares. He's a serial entrepreneur in the FinTech space. Zappo is a Bitcoin platform. We're an infrastructure company. It's the type of company I think that you need at the beginning of a technological revolution. So we allow people to buy Bitcoin, to store it securely, and to use it, to spend it and send it.
Hi, my name is Bill Barheit. I'm the CEO and founder of Abra. I guess about myself, I've been working in the internet and mobile and payments and financial services for about the last 25 years. I broke my promise to myself and I did it again and started another company about 18 months ago. So for those of you who don't know anything about Abra, I started Abra to solve one problem, and that was to make it possible for the first time to pick up a smartphone and send money to any other phone number in the world instantly, regardless of where the two consumers are, the way you would use WhatsApp to send a multimedia message. We're in private beta now with lots of users in a couple of countries. We recently announced $14 million in venture financing, hiring a lot of engineers, and I'll get into how Abra works, I'm sure, when we get into the questions.
Hi everyone, I'm Connie Galippi and the founder of BitGive, which is the first nonprofit Bitcoin and blockchain organization. And we've been around for over 2 years now. And basically we're very focused on leveraging the technology and Bitcoin in the nonprofit sector in a variety of different ways. Our early phase work was in fundraising largely and supporting really well-known nonprofits and bringing them into Bitcoin and blockchain tech. And now we're kind of starting a new phase, which we're calling Bitcoin Charity 2.0. And our first inaugural project we just started in partnership with Factum, which is to build a donation transparency platform where you can actually watch your donation flow on blockchain from the beginning all the way to the end and know exactly what it was spent on. So we're pretty excited about that.
Hi, I'm Elise Colleen. I'm a VC based in Los Angeles at March Capital Partners. We're a sister entity to Hive, the co-creation studio that Mohan introduced right before when introducing the panel. And we're focused on investing in technology companies generally starting at Series A stage and going later where there's a great technical barrier to competition. So companies that differentiate based on the infrastructure or technology application that they've created or their usage of data. I'm also a mentor here at Plug and Play in the FinTech arm and an advisor to 2 blockchain infrastructure companies, one of which is Factum. I'm very honored to say, and I'm excited to be on this with this very auspicious group tonight.
Hi, I'm Kamesh Raghavendra. I'm an early stage investor with the Hive. We have traditionally invested in data-driven applications in ad tech, media, enterprise software, financial services, and those types of verticals. What got us interested in blockchain is the unique data governance, privacy, and security characteristics that it brings to data. And we believe that this is going to disrupt a variety of verticals beyond the financial services and some of the other verticals where we've already seen enough early adoption.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to do a first question that's a round robin for all the people. And start out, I noticed that about half of the people actually know what blockchains are. Maybe the other half are just embarrassed to say so. So what is a blockchain? How is it new? And what does it bring to the table that never existed before? Let me start you off.
To me, the blockchain is the internet of ownership. So previous to the blockchain, you needed some third-party intermediary to certify ownership of anything, whether it was value in the case of money, whether it was title in the case of property. You no longer need that because of the blockchain. And if we want to get into details of how the blockchain works, we'd be here for a very long time, but in essence, the blockchain is a distributed ledger that nobody owns, that's kept on thousands, hundreds of thousands of servers around the world, and everybody updates that ledger, and it keeps it essentially authenticated in a very decentralized, distributed way. And if you remember that, and that seems simple to you, then you're a lot smarter than I am. But that's the basics as I think about it.
That was really good. So maybe rather than restate that, I'll put it in the context of what Abra's doing. Abra is very unique in this kind of new generation of decentralized applications in that it uses, unbeknownst to the consumer or any of the endpoints in our network, the Bitcoin network as well as the underlying blockchain technology to store real currency from the consumer's perspective. So we've created the concept of a synthetic dollar for the first time, such that if you have $200 in your Abra app, it stays $200 forever, for as long as you don't add or withdraw money from the application. This is a huge breakthrough, both from a financial services perspective as well as a technology perspective. And this uses Bitcoin, the underlying blockchain technology, as well as the smart contract facilities within the Bitcoin mechanism itself and the scripting language to do all this magic. Abra, to solve the problem I described of moving money from one phone number to any other phone number in the world, is a massive technical challenge. Think about this for a second. You can't become a regulated entity in 240 countries. It's impossible. So you need a system that allows you to move money peer-to-peer, store money in a peer-to-peer model, and at the same time not expose any consumers to the underlying kind of Bitcoin blockchain mumbo jumbo. So Abra uses that technology in a way that completely masks the underlying complexity to the consumer. So they actually see an app that holds dollars, euros, pesos, or yen, can automatically send money between the two, and automatically deals with currency conversion. This would not be possible if it weren't for Bitcoin and the new blockchain technology, because the alternative would be creating a stored value-based mechanism in 240 countries. So without lifting the curtain on everything, I think that what Bitcoin and blockchain does in this new world as it relates to Abra is it basically enables a truly decentralized peer-to-peer money movement system for the first time.
Fantastic. Connie, rather than just reiterate what Bitcoin does, why don't we talk about this idea of transparency? We brought up that it's a big globally distributed ledger. How does that solve trust problems?
Good question. I'm not sure, it's kind of a little bit of a
Do you want to do, we did a video on that?
Agenda. Yeah, we had intended, and I should have said something earlier, to show a very short video when we were introducing each of the panel's entities of BitGive's latest project in Kenya. And so I would like to do that, and then I will answer your question.
Do we have sound on that? Connie, would you like to narrate it?
There's some amazing, amazing young ladies in Western Kenya who have no water at their school. But I would really love for you to see the video. It's a lot more powerful than I could describe myself.
We actually always start this video with no sound. This is like the we Connie always narrates the first part of the video and then the sound goes on.
Do we have any way to do that?
Maybe at least just stop it, I think, for now, if that's okay. Yeah, this happened in Chicago when we debuted. So, hey. We'll just carry the tradition. Well, I guess I'll answer your question while we're working on the audio. So I mentioned this transparency project. So, and obviously you know about it, Peter, because we're partnering with you. So basically what we're doing is leveraging the transparency aspects of the blockchain. Is this working? Yeah. Leveraging the transparency aspects of the blockchain technology to show on a public accessible platform to donors, to anyone, from point A when a donor contributes funds to an organization, and how that money flows throughout the organization, splits off to marketing, overhead, fundraising, whatever, goes to staffing, goes to their partners, goes to build projects. And the pilot that we're using it for is with the Water Project, which is the organization that built this amazing well in Kenya with us. And their work is all in sub-Saharan Africa, so they have to get the funds from here to there. And this pilot project of the transparency model will show actually how the money gets there, what it's spent on, and everything will be documented on the blockchain. So it's pretty groundbreaking, it's pretty revolutionary, and that's the kind of things that BitGive wants to do is look at this technology and see how we can leverage it and benefit the nonprofit sector and the NGO sector.
Fantastic. Maybe to build on that, Elise, you've watched the space grow up over the last few years. Maybe you can talk more about how it, maybe you can talk more about how things have changed over the last 6 months and what's evolving in the space.
Sure, absolutely. So first I want to say when I'm looking in the audience, there's so many like just smart and incredible people here. So what a great room you gathered, Kamesh and Mohan. So I want to go back to the original question and answer it in a sentence and then bring the second part. So I think blockchain technology actually is the ability for two people or entities, so a machine and a machine or a person and a person, to communicate for the first time without a third party imposing rules upon that interaction. And so that's the simple enablement of the tech. And what I think has changed in the last 6 months is that the applications, the definition of what that means has changed as sophistication and applications built on this infrastructure has changed. So what I mean by that is that really exciting for me in the past 6 months I've seen companies present ideas that not introducing them as blockchain technology. So introducing an application where I know that there's no way they've actually built this unless they've built it on a blockchain, and they'll present the application and the value, and I'll say, well, how have you done this? This isn't, thinking that it's not possible. And the response has been, well, we're leveraging blockchain technology. And I think that's incredible. It's been really exciting, and it's been, for me, it changed the way I thought about the space. And so instead of thinking of it as a new space, it's now a maturing space as folks that don't want to be defined per se as a blockchain company the way we don't want to be defined as an internet company, for instance, have begun to build upon the infrastructure.
That's a really awesome. Would you like to build on that, Kamesh?
Yeah, sure thing. So from our perspective, if you look at the history of internet and a bunch of online services first emerging on the consumer side and now of late because of SaaS emerging on the enterprise side, we've always associated trust and service into the same entity. You get services from the entities you trust, period. And blockchain is a digital innovation where you can separate those two. You can have trust and deal with it as a separate entity, clearly defined, discretely off of the service provider who is giving you a service. And I think this is a very fundamental transition in the way we consume services, in the way we share data, in the way services interact with data. And therefore, we believe blockchain is the right progression for anything and everything to do with data. And so much as that, we see it as the next generation of big data, as we, as a group of technologists and product innovators would want to see it. And therefore, we see this huge transition happening in the digital industries as a result of this particular innovation here. And especially coming back to the more recent trends, we have seen a lot of debate around what is the goal of Bitcoin? What is the goal of scaling Bitcoin? What should it scale towards? And in some of these debates and discussions, we have seen some of these very core elements of what Bitcoin brings as a result of the blockchain technology come out open in debates and discussions. And if you see the width and the breadth of industries that are trying to look at blockchain technology as an enabler for enforcing trust with their partners, with their customers, you'll try and see how trust is becoming an entity that the online internet type of technologies can deal with versus just forcing some age-old legal system between two entities, which was the traditional way of dealing with trust even in the internet. And that's kind of our investment thesis as we look at new companies, new entrepreneurs trying to apply this technology on new use cases.
That's fantastic. I'm going to start asking a couple individual questions, but would anybody like to build on that?
I just wanted to check on the audio and see if we have.
Does it work now?
Okay. Do you guys mind if we?
Let's do this. It's
Okay,
definitely.
we interrupt the flow for a moment. I think you'll really enjoy this, and it's short. In 2013, we started to dream about how the Bitcoin changed the world. Kenya is years ahead of the rest of the world, using mobile transactions throughout their daily lives.
The advantage of using Bitcoin, BigPesa, and M-Pesa is that this is mobile money, so it's quite quick. The costs of transferring this money from the US is quite low, and BitGive will be a good platform for doing that in the future.
Last year, we partnered with the Water Project and brought clean, safe water to a girls' school in Kakamega, Kenya. I'm so excited to share with you how bringing clean water to their school has changed their lives.
My name is Okoma Florence, and I'm the president of this school, Shisango Girls. When they come in the morning, they come with water from their homes. The water is not enough for them. They're forced to go to that stream over there. It's 1 hour to go to come back. Most of the time, they come complaining of headaches, stomachache, and sometimes they shiver in classes until they are not able to control it.
In Kenya here, a girl child is endangered. The society looks at a girl child as somebody who is not of that great importance, somebody who's just there to be given into early marriage.
There are difficulties out there. There are certain things you cannot stop me from doing, but my tradition tell me no. But you are struggling to come out of it. That's why you want girls to go to school, learn, know their rights.
It is important for girls to study because they are the ones who bring in developments in their communities. When I heard that the school would be having a water well, I was very happy because I knew that I was going to be given a very humble time to study and education. For now, since I've gotten that water, we will be able to wash, we will be able to drink, and it will be safe for our health.
The Water Project believes in empowering women, empowering the girl child in the community.
Those girls are happy. They have a reason to smile. They have a reason to sit down and study. They have a reason to also compete with the boys in Kenya.
You see us in the newspaper, in the magazine, Shisango Girls. And you know it's because of water that has made this school to come up.
They want to prove themselves that they are useful to the society.
Those girls have the opportunity to acquire good employment opportunities because now they sit down and think.
Being here in Kenya, I'm now convinced more than ever that Bitcoin is the future of giving.
Right, Connie, it's much better with sound.
It is much better with sound. And thanks for letting us, I know it's a little bit of an interruption in the flow, and we just transported you to Kenya, and now we're back in Silicon Valley.
Well, so build on that. You spent some time in the developing world. Obviously, banking is nil in that world. How is Bitcoin and how is blockchain technology transforming banking around the world and the access to it?
Well, my experience there was actually quite unique because they have the M-Pesa mobile money system there, which is very unique in the world. I mean, there are other places that have similar mobile systems, but it's pretty well advanced and it's pretty prolific. I mean, it's very prolific in their culture. And basically, BitPesa, who was a partner for us on this project and funded the film that you just saw, they are located in Nairobi, and they built on top of that. So they basically blew it open with the Bitcoin and blockchain rails to bring funding from anywhere in the world into the M-Pesa system, which prior to that was a system that only operated within physical fiat, going to the mom and pop shop where you buy your soda, using a SIM card on a feature phone and transferring that fiat into digital cash. It's now been blown open through BitPesa and blockchain technology to anywhere in the world having access to that. Hence the impact that we're having with BitGive through the nonprofit sector and having the ability to get funds there and build projects. So, and I'm sure Bill can probably talk about his experience as well.
Yeah, Bill, why don't you build on your experiences moving money through the world and sort of where are the challenges there? How is blockchain technology helping?
Sure. Gee, where to start? So I've done business in a lot of countries trying to facilitate mobile banking, from the US to Haiti, where we started a foundation that's banked tens of thousands of consumers using technology very similar to M-Pesa. I've learned a few things along the way. So the first thing we've learned is that the migration to smartphones is very close to reaching a very critical juncture where most feature phones will be cycled out of existence, and that will probably happen by 2021. I've seen reports with plus or minus there. That is a big deal because the ability to have storage on a phone, the ability to do transaction processing on a phone changes everything. And that's probably the key enabler. That plus giving people data access, which Internet.org and others are trying to do for people that can't afford it is also an equally big deal. And if you've ever traveled in the Caribbean, you've seen signs for free WhatsApp and stuff like that. That's usually Internet.org in the background involved in trying to convince wireless carriers to give certain IP addresses free access to the internet. So that's a big deal. I think that the biggest learning though is that the compliance complexity of traditional banking combined with the fact that 240 other wireless carriers have tried to do what M-Pesa has done and by and large have failed miserably, points to a lot of learnings, right? And the biggest learning is that even in Kenya, where M-Pesa's market share has actually fallen the last few months, they're down about 67% now because there's a price war going on, has created a huge problem for getting mobile money systems off the ground. So some people have an extra SIM in Kenya just to use M-Pesa, even though they use other carriers for their wireless service because M-Pesa is so prevalent. That's not going to happen anywhere else because M-Pesa started out with a much higher market share and has actually lost market share. So in Philippines, where they've had mobile money forever, right, it's not used for person-to-person money transfer, even though it's a huge market in the Philippines because the carriers refuse to work together to enable interoperability. It would be like not being able to send a text message from AT&T to Verizon, which, by the way, wasn't actually possible in the US 15 years ago for the same reason, if any of you may remember. So that's the net effect of what happens when carriers basically want a closed wall and aren't willing to interoperate. So the key learnings are compliance complexity. You need a solution that works globally that is not under the umbrella of a carrier-driven feature. And it needs to hide the complexity of all of the next generation technology, Bitcoin, whatever, and deal in real cash. And if you can do those things and have a user experience that works like WhatsApp or text messaging, you're on something.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Maybe I should ask Ted, how do we keep all this secure?
Start by storing your Bitcoins at Zappo, but no, security is a big issue, and one of the reasons that adoption of Bitcoin has actually slowed a little bit in terms of its growth. It's still growing very, very fast by most standards, but people are afraid that it's not secure, and the key to securing your Bitcoin is keeping your private keys. We can talk about what those are, but keeping your private keys safe. So when I buy a Bitcoin, what I'm getting is essentially credit on that ledger that I talked about. And in order to move that credit around, I need to have a private key to my address on that ledger. So when you hear about hacks, people losing their Bitcoin, money once they got their Bitcoin, it's not a problem with Bitcoin itself. It's not a problem with the Bitcoin protocol. The best hackers in the world have been trying to break Bitcoin for 6 years. They haven't done it. Governments have probably tried to do it. They haven't done it. It's not going to happen. Bitcoin is secure, and it's very robust. The problem arises when you store your private keys in an insecure way, or with a service provider that's either incompetent or corrupt. So how do we keep our Bitcoin secure? You have to be very careful about who you keep your private keys with, or there is a philosophy within some Bitcoin community that you should maintain your own private keys. You should never entrust them to a third party. Zappo's belief is that there will always be certain technologically sophisticated users who want to do that. It's very unlikely that Bitcoin would ever cross over into the mainstream if everyone had to keep their own private keys safe. I think that would be a disaster. My mother-in-law is not going to use Bitcoin, so she has to learn the ins and outs of private key security. So that's what we do as a hosted service, and we think we're as secure, more secure than anybody in the industry.
Thank you. To flip it over to our venture friends, how does this sustain a business? How do we take all this lovely technology and turn it into customers and cash flow, and where are you seeing traction in that one? Kamesh, why don't you answer that, and then I'll let Elise build on that.
I have a quick comment on security before getting into
yeah.
this. So two other dimensions of security that are very relevant to Bitcoin. One is privacy. There's been a lot of debate and discussion, with NSA and the Snowdens of the world around what is the acceptable definition of privacy and how much of privacy should be traded off for larger societal goods, like security, national security, and stuff like that. And the second part is fungibility. One of the basic characteristics of fiat currency is that two $1 bills are indistinguishable. You can't discriminate from one bill to the other. Can we continue to have the same fungible property when it comes to Bitcoin? And again, there are a lot of debates and discussion whether Bitcoin's approach of having public verifiability of all your transactions can be made without getting into the way of fungibility. And these two are again part of the core kind of discussion around what should Bitcoin's future be and blockchain technology's future be. Coming to the second part, which is driving a business around blockchain technology. If the blockchain technology is bringing new characteristics of data governance, privacy, or security that enables certain problems to be solved much more efficiently than they are done today, and I think if that is the approach, then that's a win-win. I mean, you're bringing new efficiencies into existing systems, and that will obviously bring back much higher returns on whatever the constituents of the system invest in. And that's kind of the rationale behind using blockchain technology in financial services for doing settlements with much higher levels of efficiency, in enabling payments across borders, enabling payments within borders across existing boundaries and silos. So all these type of use cases lend themselves towards bringing new efficiencies, and therefore it's very natural to build a business around that. In terms of Bitcoin in particular, and enabling commerce, enabling payment type of technologies around Bitcoin, the business efficiencies are obvious. I mean, you saw the kind of efficiencies that Bitcoin can bring just in the video that Connie showed before. I think the real question is how can this scale? How can this scale into much bigger businesses for a large community of venture capital investors to participate and make substantial gains or returns from those investments? That's kind of the hard question that we think, and that's a whole other topic of discussion. How can we make Bitcoin something more scalable, more fundamental, and make the community of users of this technology more pervasive across all parts of the society? So in my mind, these are like two separate discussions: what efficiencies blockchain technology can bring, and Bitcoin as a medium, how pervasive it can get, and therefore make businesses big.
Fantastic, thank you. Go ahead and build on that, Elise.
Sure, so I agree. I think that the efficiencies created in blockchain technology are what make it intractable. So when there was discussion, which seems to have faded, when there was discussion maybe 6 to 12 months ago on will blockchain last, it was a bit silly, right? Because once the door has been opened to the creation of this type of efficiency in communication and in data and record storage, you can't take this back from people, certainly. I think that there's
it's not going anywhere.
The banks won't let it go, that's for sure. So beyond that, though, I think that there's a couple interesting things happening, and that's that, and I referenced that earlier in what is blockchain, and blockchain is a way for two parties to interact with without a third party imposing rules, which means that there could be new forms, new people transacting, or new start and end points of a transaction. So I can connect newly to someone in Kenya, for instance, directly without going through an intermediary, which means I think also that there can be new forms of value monetized. So a simple, for instance, is in the US, we're thinking about how to become more efficient in farming and in agriculture, and maybe some of this data exists in farmers in different areas of Africa, and how can they monetize that data or knowledge, and can that be done because I can have access, newly have access to that knowledge directly by going into the community and transacting, and in this case perhaps doing microtransactions. So this is one sort of potential use in a very specific case that's enabled by people being able to newly connect with one another and communicate in a way that we transmit value to one another. And I'm excited to see what we will assign value to now that we are able to communicate in this way.
So just a few comments, because I thought both of your statements were really interesting. So technically speaking, if you're interested in doing transaction processing, unless you're trying to do things at internet scale on a global basis, the Bitcoin blockchain is pretty much the most inefficient transaction processing system ever created. However, it was created to solve a very specific problem, and it turns out it's the only way to do it, right? And that's why nobody ever came up with the idea before, because it's so inefficient that the idea of using every computer in the world to validate one transaction is insane on the surface of it.
But that would be, sorry, just to quickly interrupt, so that would be totally based on how you define inefficiency.
Well, I define inefficiency as
you're defining
central
energy
transaction,
right?
on central transaction processing versus decentral. So if you take, for example, a bank's need to move money between accounts, moving that onto a blockchain if the bank is actually storing the value would be crazy, because the cost of computation would go up a millionfold, right? If your goal is to completely, let's say in rough terms, decentralize that transaction, there's actually no other way to do it. So it's not a question of efficiency versus inefficiency. It's actually a question of what's possible versus what's impossible. And you couldn't do internet on-the-wire settlement of person-to-person or entity-to-entity transactions before the blockchain model, because you didn't have the proof of work to solve the Byzantine general's problem. And like I said, the breakthrough was that it never occurred to, certainly to me or anyone else that I know that's been working on this, that the only way to do it was brute force and use every computer on the internet, which on the surface of it, like I said, is insane.
I think Alice's point is that if you centralize everything, the so-called gain in efficiency, you're going to lose that by investing in protecting that one mammoth centralized server you created.
Agreed.
And you invest so much in protecting that you're rather more efficient in decentralizing.
Totally agree, but that's my point. That's the difference between centralization and decentralization. It's not the difference between efficiency and inefficiency.
I still think that's absolutely definitional. So I think it's I don't see it yet how someone in a non-developed market would think that this was a less efficient way to communicate or transact. In Kenya, would they? So if I need to get money anywhere outside of a developed economy, it's much more efficient to use blockchain. So actually, I've had this experience even in developed economies. So for instance, at a dinner the other day, the easiest way for us to split the bill certainly was to use Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
and it's 2 days more. It's 2 days easier for me as an end user.
I get it. I think it's really important. I'm sorry to monopolize this. I'll give it up in a second. But I think it's really important to understand how the technology is helping and adding value at any given time. For a bunch of New Yorkers around the dinner table, I'm quite certain that Venmo is easier than just using raw Bitcoin. Okay, that doesn't mean they couldn't use Bitcoin. It's just that getting in and out of the system, getting back to dollars, it's probably easier for them to use Venmo. What I would say is, as somebody who's worked with, I started a company to compete with Western Union with Boom Financial because the costs are ridiculously high. It has inefficiencies, but it works for millions of people. As much as I don't like it, it does work for millions of people. What I would say is look at what transactions aren't possible at all because of what's there or not there, and that's way more interesting to me than is it inefficient or is it better than handing somebody $5, right? And so it's the impossible becoming possible that I think is really exciting about the underlying technology. That's the thing.
I guess two venture capitalists arguing for Satoshi Nakamoto made him proud today.
Yeah, that's right. That'll be the takeaway.
So I'm a little worried that people who maybe are not steeped in Bitcoin and blockchain are a little bit lost by some of the conversation. And I just want to say that if you're here tonight, you're either very lucky or very smart. I remember when I first got into the internet back in the mid-90s, I felt like I was late. And I went to work at investment bank, and I went to AOL, and it was cool, I was part of it, but I was not early. I was not a pioneer. Everybody in this room has a chance to be a pioneer in something as fundamental as the internet. That's what really matters. And if you take anything away from this conversation tonight, it's that there is something coming here. It's the equivalent of 91, 92 for the internet. And if you really pay attention to it and you dig deep on it, you have the potential to do something that impacts the world fundamentally. So all of us up here are trying to solve problems based on blockchain and Bitcoin, but it's a little like Hollywood. Nobody knows anything. We're all doing our best to understand something that's as new and fundamental as electricity, and predicting what electricity or what the internet was going to do over 10 to 20 years. It was just impossible. We would have been a fool to try and do it. And that's where we are with the blockchain right now. You know, if you want to understand Bitcoin as currency, which I fully believe in, I think this whole thing you're hearing from traditional financial services companies and banks and stuff like that, they're worried, and they should be. They're a conservative industry, and finally, disintermediation started back in the early 90s that took out the blockbusters and the brick and mortars, that took out the post office. This software is eating the world process that up till now the banks have survived and survived very well. It's finally coming for them. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Banks have a choice here. They can either co-opt this technology and succeed, much like AT&T did with the internet, or they can ignore it and pretend that it's not going to happen, or make up stuff about it being insecure, in which case it'll probably perish. It might take 5, 10, 15 years, but it'll happen. But this whole notion of people hiding behind, I like the blockchain, but not Bitcoin. That's a way, to me, yeah, it's nonsense. There might be some private blockchains that get formed, and that's cool. Basically, what you've done is create a private database with a bunch of different vendors. But since it's a closed garden, it's a walled garden, the innovation is going to take place outside of that, and that's what really matters. Again, sorry to go on and get on the soapbox here. I'll shut up in just a second. When I was at AOL, most people getting on the internet back in the mid-late 90s didn't know the difference between AOL and the internet. They thought AOL was the internet. And AOL was king. When we bought Time Warner, we thought, this is it, we've conquered all. But what we didn't know is that outside of our little walled garden, there were companies like Google, and eventually 2003 Facebook, and now Uber, and people who were innovating in this open source protocol that, of course, they came up with applications that were much more interesting to users. And pretty soon, if users wanted to take full advantage of the internet, they couldn't get it at AOL. And that was the end. And so this whole notion that traditional financial services are going to form these blockchains that are going to be better than Bitcoin blockchain, it's nonsense, in my opinion. You might see some short-term successes with that, but the innovation that's going on, just beginning on the Bitcoin blockchain, is going to blow everything away.
100% agree.
Yeah.
So this is an awesome time for us to stop, and let's ask some questions for the audience. Because we've got limited mics, I'm actually going to walk around. What's that? Oh, hang on, okay. Blinding up there.
I hear a lot of enthusiasm here on the stage about blockchains, about Bitcoin. Do me a favor. I guess I'm not smart. I'm only lucky I'm not smart. So, will you juxtapose Bitcoin and blockchain versus PayPal? Why couldn't I use PayPal to transfer money over to Kenya?
That's a key question.
Well, so I in the spirit of Ted's trying to kind of bring us back to the ground here about what the possibilities are with this technology and not get so into the weeds. This is a very great question, and this is why I interrupted our flow to make sure you saw the video, because it really, I think, shows what the possibilities are and what the differences are, right? So with PayPal, you can send money, but somebody in Kenya may or may not be able to access that at all. It isn't secure like Bitcoin is, and it's not going to cost you a third of the price. So what Bitcoin and blockchain offers is instant, global, peer-to-peer, secure, and at a fraction of the cost of what's out there now. Along with everything else that we've been talking about that can be built on the actual technology of blockchain that Bitcoin is based upon. So it's the first app is transferring funds that are all those things I just named. There's so much more to come, like Ted referred to. Like, we haven't thought about the Facebooks and Ubers yet of what's to come.
Oh, I'm sure there's more to come.
So can I just
Just one follow-up on that. You said secure. Now I get it. I actually have insurance when I use PayPal. So that's my security. I know that my money is going where it's supposed to go. I get it.
So a couple of things. There is consumer protection inherent in having a financial intermediary manage your funds, and that's what you're referring to in terms of the protection you get. So I would invite you to think differently about the difference in terms of PayPal and Bitcoin, in terms of financial intermediary and no financial intermediary. Okay? So in order to have PayPal work in 240 countries, you need to be financially compliant as a financial intermediary in 240 countries. Make sense? Right? That is untenable even for PayPal. Even for Citibank, it's untenable. Right? Citibank, I believe, is licenses in 70 to 80 countries. All right? So how can you possibly move money between consumers or some form of stored value between consumers in any two places in the world, knowing that there's nobody who could be financially compliant in every country? Well, that's where the idea of money that actually is stored on the internet itself adds huge value, because now it enables transactions that aren't even possible in the PayPal world. So I'm not really interested in competing with PayPal or Western Union on their terms. No interest. I mean, they've been at it for a long time. They know what they're doing. I'm not necessarily agree with the decisions they make and how they run their business, but it would be arrogant to think that I could kill their business on their terms. What I want to do is figure out how the 7.5 billion people who can't use those services today can transact on the internet using next generation smartphones. And that's the key difference in my mind between Bitcoin and PayPal and other banking services.
This is a great question. Those are great answers. And I just want to build very quickly on what Bill said. The easiest way to think about Bitcoin, the currency, is as digital cash. Not money, but cash. Okay? This is Jared Brito does a great thing about this on CoinCenter. If I have a $100 bill and I give it to you, you have it, now I don't. That's it. Traditionally, in electronic payments, that was not possible. You may think you're paying someone electronically, but you're not. You're telling PayPal, debit my account and credit their account. And whether it's PayPal or bank or card network, there is always that intermediary. You are never one-to-one. Bitcoin is digital cash. Now it's only you and me. And as Bill stated, what that does is open up communication, because money is ultimately language that we use to communicate about value, to the 5 or 6 billion people on this earth that don't have an account, don't have access to an account, a PayPal account, or a credit card account, or a bank account. It is the most revolutionary thing that I will certainly see in my lifetime.
Fantastic. Other questions?
Yes, Mike presenting from Camp Marketing. Here from hardware. So earlier in the conversation, we had a inflection point where there was different views at different levels of the supply chain about what efficiency is. We had one view of efficiency at the market level. We had one view of efficiency at the infrastructure level. From hardware, I'm interested in what we're about to say, something about consuming all the cycles, all the bandwidth, all the storage. Could you talk about the technology's appetite for hardware sell hardware? And two, also from a responsibility standpoint, because it sounded like your comment was, well, are we going to become responsible in how we utilize the hardware infrastructure?
Great question. So if you go back to the news groups when Satoshi was still online, he wrote about this. He actually mentioned it in his white paper as well, which it's fascinating. So I would encourage you to read it and just go look on the online news groups where you can actually see his writings. And he talks about bandwidth utilization and what is likely to happen as usage grows. And he talked about what will happen when Bitcoin moves from a mining-based economy to a transaction processing-based economy, which in English means you're not creating new Bitcoin, but you still need the miners in order to validate new transactions. And so clearly, if you look at electricity requirements, hardware requirements, storage requirements, it is a geometric growth problem when you're trying to do decentralized computing at internet scale versus what I used to do at Goldman Sachs, which was highly centralized computing, where we didn't care who else saw the data. We didn't want anybody else to see the data. So, but again, I fundamentally believe this is a fantastic thing, even with all of the issues that I just brought up, because it enables all kinds of transactions that Ted was talking about, and that you were talking about with the giving model that simply aren't easily achievable for the other 6.5 billion people. Or what if the underlying Bitcoin and scripting technology ends up being a reserve currency for business-to-business transactions at global scale? Think about that for a second. That is, you're talking about trillions of dollars now. Now, Bitcoin couldn't handle that today because the market cap is 4 billion, right? So you kind of be a little insane to start a business-to-business startup in this environment. But if the market cap grows because of the consumer apps that we're trying to build, now all of a sudden it can actually process fiat transactions in a business-to-business environment as a reserve currency that can settle on the wire, right? Now you're talking about replacing SWIFT for people. So one of my mentors has been on the board at Coke forever. We talk about it all the time. They got hundreds of thousands of trucks in South America that drive all over the place carrying cash. It's been a problem for decades, right? What if you could replace that with a smartphone and business-to-business settlement on the wire, but still using pesos and all the other currencies that they're expecting, right? And remove all of the security and transactional complexity of that. That's why you would want all of the things that you mentioned, lots of hardware, lots of bandwidth, and things that on the surface may not make sense, but you can't do the transactions in a decentralized peer-to-peer way without that. That's the bottom.
So is it going to be used socially responsibly? You have to, but still it's going to be capitalist.
Look, I spent 2 hours on the phone with the CFPB, providing free consulting, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, providing free consulting more or less around the same question this morning. And look, there's nothing that you can't do with paper cash that you can't also do with digital cash. Now, talk to the 2 DEA agents who also believed that there was nothing that you can't do with paper cash, with digital cash. They were caught within minutes. They weren't arrested within minutes, but they were caught within minutes. They just wanted to follow the money and see what these crazies were going to do and see who else they should be arrested. So you would be insane to start doing nefarious things that you used to be doing with paper cash in a bag or in a suitcase and move those things onto the blockchain, where you can go to Coinalytics or blockchain.info and any other website and see the entire transaction history for any address on the blockchain. Right? I mean, you have to be out of your mind.
And I think, back to your question about efficiencies, and I didn't want to enter this debate, but I do want to just add a point or two, and then maybe see if Elise wants to say anything. But I think you hit on some of the efficiencies on the other end, which are the on the ground materials, manpower, security, fraud, and liabilities that are opened up through all those loops. All those things cost a lot of money. So you're swapping out one inefficiency for another. It depends on what your priorities are and what you're thinking about and what your end result or end game is and what the best result or the best route is to get to that result, right? So, I mean, if you're looking for a way to transfer funds globally and securely, ideally peer-to-peer, so that we don't have centralization and all of the things that that opens up, at a fraction of the cost, I think that all of those things outweigh any inefficiencies that you might see where you're going to just flip where there's inefficiencies now to something that's hardware or energy. My background's in the environment, so we also have to, my second point would be think about the importance of renewable energy, not just in this conversation, but for everything. So, do you want to add to that?
Other questions?
Hey, my name is B, CEO of Clef, which is a better way to log into things, but a major question I've had about Bitcoin blockchain is that so far the technology is very opinionated towards liberty, and that has made the community pretty political around a lot of the exciting things that can be done with Bitcoin. And my question is, as it spreads to more people, do you think that the technology will become less opinionated, or that more of the world will believe in those opinions?
So I have an answer to that, but I don't want to monopolize since I was just speaking.
Go ahead.
So first of all, I'd like to say I am an exception to what you're saying. In the early days, I've been around for 2.5 years, which in Bitcoin is a very long time, and I don't align with liberty. And so, you know, to me, coming at it from that perspective politically, but also coming at it from a nonprofit perspective, has been, I would say I've been somewhat of a minority to a certain degree, but also bringing, I feel like, a completely different perspective and angle and skill set and background and all those things to a space that desperately needs that diversity. And so what I feel like we're doing at BitGive and some other companies in this space are looking at things differently, are bringing this perspective to, you know, what does this look like in the real world? How is this relevant to a mainstream audience? Like, what can you do physically to have impact? And that's another reason why I really wanted you guys to see the video, because it's a physical impact of what the technology can do, and it talks about the future as well. And to me, that's really important and actually critical for this industry to succeed.
Yeah, so I think when you have a distributed system or decentralized versus centralized system, that it's inherently apolitical, and so as greater scale is gained, the system will be used by everyone. I think it's almost scarily not political, and I'm excited for that piece of it. I think the technology is really pure and beautiful in that way.
And I want to link this question with the conversation around efficiency. You call a system efficient when you're matching the demand with the just right amount of supply. And that is when the market corrects itself. The market expresses its demand and finds people who can participate in supply. And I feel Bitcoin is a great, perfectly efficient market system, because the complexity of the hardware, the amount of energy that goes into validation, matches the volume of miners, the volume of people who are willing to put in their resources to do the service. And the volume of the supply matches the volume of demand. If the demand goes back, fewer people will be incentivized to supply this service, this digital service of providing trust. And therefore, when fewer people supply, the complexity of the problem becomes simpler, and your hardware form factors become simple. And as you can see, it's a completely end-to-end, open, efficient market system. Things get political when there is unnatural intervention in the system, when there is a tyrant, when there is a regulator or a middleman or any kind of oppressive system that doesn't come from a democratic way, doesn't come from an inclusive conversation, and brings in inefficiencies in the system. That's when politics happens. And I feel this is a system which is more open, more efficient, and therefore potential to get politicized is a lot less.
Well, and I don't in any way need to be critical of any political ideology, but I think that I don't mean to be critical of any political ideology in this question. It's just interesting for me as we think about the technology broadening its audience. But it does seem to me that your strong vocalization of like a free market being the most efficient system is a highly political statement. Like that is something which
some people believe and some people think that there need to be regulations, and that there are problems with the efficiency of free markets. And that Bitcoin, because it's difficult to regulate, pushes towards a free market. And that's exciting to a lot of people. But, I guess my question is, will that become more exciting to more people, or will the technology be adopted to suit the politics of different people?
Sure, and I think the point you're bringing is regulations on people's behavior, on people's intentions. And the way we have structured our system of governance is to bring among ourselves best behaviors that is going to do the common good for all. And that's part of the political science and the governance aspect. But the efficiencies we were talking about was more at the technology, at the system level. And that is where I was arguing that the market efficiencies are going to design the most effective system.
So I was at Netscape in the mid-90s, and I remember I was at a sales conference, and everybody it was all kumbaya, the internet, 95, Netscape IPO, booyah, and then the guy we had ISPs from all over the world that were there, because in those days we would sell the browser to the ISPs, and a guy from Deutsche Telekom got on the stage with a nice chart of where the traffic was coming from, and it was all of a sudden you could hear a pin drop, right? Guess what? 60% of the traffic, porn. 20% of the traffic, gambling. And it was one of those things, you kind of knew it, but you didn't talk about it, right? And all of a sudden, he was like, it's great, look what we're doing. Hey, right on, And so, to me, at the end of the day, it's like talking about the value of TCP/IP versus the value of being able to go to CNN.com and read the news on the web browser. Fundamentally, what we're talking about with Bitcoin and the underlying protocol, in my opinion, is TCP/IP. And the question is, what does TCP/IP enable? How long has it been since? That's 22 years since we had that presentation. It's funny how I still remember it 22 years later. 22 years later with Google and Facebook and what the internet has transformed from the AOL days, what is TCP/IP for money going to do in the same way 15 years from now? And so, therefore, I think that the bias, it's technology. Technology can't be biased. People can be biased, right? So either it's going to be applied to solve real-world problems, and its value will go to hundreds of billions of dollars, or it will slowly fade away. There's only two possible outcomes.
Actually, that was really well said. I was just going to add that the quickest way to destroy a movement is to attach a political agenda to it. If you look back on history, recent, long-term, whatever, you will destroy what you're trying to build. So my hope is that if there is a political agenda attached to Bitcoin, and maybe among some in the community there is, I hope it goes away, and I think it will.
Questions in the back, I think I see. You guys have to understand how bright these lights are in our eyes. So.
Hi, my name is Irving. This has been a really great conversation, learning a lot. This might be a question more for Ted. You mentioned the open nature of the innovation of Bitcoin, how it's going to win the closed or private blockchain. There's this ongoing debate in the Bitcoin developer community about block sizes and so forth, and it seems like the decision-making framework is a bit fragmented. There's no really clear path. Everyone has different Bitcoin improvement protocols or certain proposals. Do you see any effective ways that the Bitcoin developer community can work with miners or merchants or exchanges to push that forward in an effective way, or do you see this as a roadblock to actually Bitcoin progressing as a technology?
I see it as beautiful, actually. Sure. So, okay. We talk about the use of the blockchain for more than just currency. I think the best way to think about how that's done is that it's like attaching information to the memo line of a check. Okay. So what would happen if I wanted to memorialize the birth records of my son for identity purposes? I would enter that that essentially into a Bitcoin transaction and send a small amount of Bitcoin, okay? The problem is that as you add more and more stuff into Bitcoin transactions, it can clog up, it increases the size of transactions and it clogs up the network. So in very general terms, this is a very inelegant way of saying that what we have is a problem potentially with maxing out the max size of Bitcoin blocks. Okay, I'm sure Bill and others could give a better explanation of it. I will quickly say that I don't see a problem with the controversy that goes on. We are trying to build something, a decentralized governance system with a decentralized technology that we claim is going to change the world. That's not going to be a smooth process. And in fact, controversy and dissent is hopefully going to be a part of it. And ideally, we're going to come out of it stronger for having developed this muscle memory for how we deal with conflicts and how we move forward. I'm very confident, knowing a lot of the principles involved in it, that we are going to come out of it even stronger. So short term, it may cause some disconcerted looks from people in traditional financial services sector who are worried about getting Bitcoin. Long term, I think it's a strength, not a weakness.
I agree with all that. A couple of things I'd say. Maybe you know that there was this entity known as the Bitcoin Foundation, which was a disaster, in my opinion. I don't know that there's many people who were involved who would disagree with that. And I think partially for the reason that the beauty of the Bitcoin model is that not only is it decentralized in terms of what it enables, it's decentralized in terms of how you actually enable it, right? And unlike Linux, which has a benevolent dictator, which I actually think is necessary in the Linux world, I think you explicitly don't want a benevolent dictator in the Bitcoin world. Now, specifically to the block size question, the implication of that, to be clear, is that effectively Bitcoin can process more or less 7 transactions a second because of the limitation on the block size and how mining works. Compare that to Visa, which processes thousands of transactions a second, okay? So you wouldn't want to use Bitcoin today, right, the way Visa is used. And if you think about what I'm trying to do with Abra, what we're trying to do with Abra, that's a big problem. Okay? So Abra is highly dependent upon the community fixing this problem. As a matter of fact, I'll go on the limb and say if they don't fix this problem in the next 2 years, Abra dies. Right? And they know my opinion on this because I'm in their face like every other day on this. Right? So, but they're going to fix the problem. Okay? They've actually fixed much harder problems than this. Now, to your point, I completely agree with your point that it needs to be a violent, drag them in the hallways, kick them in the head debate. Because if you don't have a benevolent dictator and you're not having this level of hard debate, you're probably not doing the right thing at the end of the day. So I'm actually really encouraged that for the first time, we have a technology that doesn't have that benevolent dictator that has developers going at it in public. I don't really necessarily think it has to be as public as it is, but the alternative is really bad in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you said something that's really important in this conversation. If you've ever watched software being made, it's made by a bunch of engineers who stand in a room in front of a whiteboard and they scream at each other. They literally, the loudest one wins. And that's how engineering, that's how great technology gets built, right? It's an argument by stubborn, smart people. That's the problem, right? What's going on right now in the Bitcoin world is all these stubborn, smart people are having this conversation in the open, and everybody goes, oh my God, right? But that's how technology gets made. And it's fun to watch. We should celebrate this because open source and open development means these conversations happen in the open, and like, if you can't handle that, technology is not the right field for you.
Plus it's fun to watch. Fun.
Oh yeah, it's entertainment. Go ahead.
I just have a comment to add in this whole Bitcoin debate. I was in Montreal a few weekends ago where the Scaling Bitcoin workshop happened. I feel there's a great representation from the screaming software side of the Bitcoin community. Great minds. It was like the most dense intellectual group of people I've ever seen in my life. Of course, there's a great representation on the supply chain side, the miners, the mining community being very engaged in this conversation. I feel the demand side is underrepresented. people who are going to use these, people who have money in their Bitcoin wallets or potential users in other use cases of blockchain behind Bitcoin, I found that constituent was underrepresented in this discussion. And I hope smart people together will figure a way to include and therefore be completely inclusive in this discussion.
Other questions?
Yeah, right here. John, interesting discussion. I just wondered about other possible applications for the blockchain beyond financials. And I guess what comes to my mind first is like electronic voting. Right? We want certifiable one person, one vote. Nobody's supposed to know who voted. Everybody's supposed to know that everybody voted, right? That kind of thing. So it seems like a good possible area for this kind of technology. I don't know if there's any others that you're thinking about, but just sort of wonder about non-financial applications of blockchain.
I think there's many. I've talked about what we're looking at BitGive with transparency. Peter, I know you're moderating, but you might want to add about what Factom's up to, and Bill said he had something to add too.
Sure. I'll take this one. I am a technologist also. So yeah, the Bitcoin and blockchain is revolutionizing money. We all know that. That's what we hear about first. But at the end of the day, it's doing that with data tools. And we've always thought that there's a whole lot more data problems than there are money problems. The idea that, as we were describing, you could put into the memo of a check, or essentially a piece of data that never, ever, ever goes away, as permanent, immutable, distributed across the world, is a really powerful idea. And there are very smart people working on everything from voting to land title registries to better ways of doing mortgage transactions to like culling all the crazy derivative trading in the world to if you can think of a data problem, there is an opportunity to use Bitcoin and the blockchain and this tool set to approach it. And I think that going back to this idea of the block size debate and what's going on in the world is that there's so much opportunity for so many data problems to be tackled using this. We want to make sure we're doing it in a way where we don't have to fight over the space. So we're in a room full of entrepreneurs, and I think that one of the most important things I want you to all to walk away with is if you can think of a problem, there's probably a way to use this very, very, very new technology to solve it in a way that nobody's ever thought of before. Go ahead. And would you pass the mic to the lady behind you? Oh.
Yeah, hi. This is the first evening I've ever heard of the word blockchain, and I really don't know very much about Bitcoin either. If I wanted to spend some time studying it and learning about how I could leverage the technology, what would be some good sources that you could just throw out there if I can go and investigate?
Well, I think for me, coming at it probably similarly as you would a couple years ago, the first thing I would suggest is the white paper. It might sound like, oh, it's going to be technical or long, but it's actually pretty short and it's really compelling, and it definitely would be the first place to start, I would say. And you just Google Satoshi Bitcoin white paper. And depending on how in-depth you want to go, I think Bitcoin Magazine has been around since the very, very early days of Bitcoin and has pretty much documented the evolution of the technology and a lot of what's happened in the space with all the different businesses and things like that. I don't even know how many volumes they've put out. Now they have an online platform too. And also, even more in-depth would be Let's Talk Bitcoin. They have also been around as long and have done probably hundreds by now of podcasts, and they really dive really deep on everything, and you can get the whole history. So those would be my suggestions.
So the 3 papers that I send people that are ramping up on Bitcoin and blockchain, one, the white paper for sure, which I would, excuse me, tied to the chat rooms in the cypherpunk community, where you can just see Satoshi and the community around Satoshi that really built this over the course of just a ton of years of iterating and communicating with one another so that you can see what's going on rather than listen to the loud voices on Twitter or in the community. And often that's based on politics or on ego, and I think it's good to go to the original source. The other two things are to do shout outs to other VCs. Chris Dixon wrote something on stored hash cache. That's a brilliant short piece. And then the third thing I send is Naval writing under Startup Boy. That's the title of his blog, and it's the fifth protocol layer, and talking about the infrastructure and what it enables beyond internet. So these are the papers like that I sent to my mom and dad, who now both totally, advocate for and can explain blockchain to you.
I just want to caution you, once you go down this rabbit hole, there's no coming back. And I mean that sincerely, like, Bitcoin, I really feel grateful to have been exposed to Bitcoin and to have gotten into it, because it is completely fulfilling. If you're looking at it from a philosophical point of view, a political point of view, economics, technology, you could spend all your time going deep on it. And I would just say be patient, because our CEO likes to say, perhaps a bit crudely, there's a Bitcoin pregnancy that happens, and it can take 2 to 6 months before it really hits you. And when it does, honestly, there's no going back. I've never seen anybody go deep into Bitcoin and blockchain and come out saying there's nothing there. It doesn't work that way. And the deeper you go, the more it makes sense. The last point is, when you start learning about the history of money and how our current financial pipes came to be, you realize how absurd our current system is in many, many ways. And even though the blockchain may seem complicated, take a look at the number of intermediaries and the number of hacks that go into one credit card transaction. It's ridiculous, so Bitcoin is actually in many ways much simpler.
Can you post the 3 articles on the comment section? Yeah, you can. Okay.
Hi. I'm over here.
Over here. Over here.
Marco.
I moved. Follow.
Oh, got it. My name's Alan. So I have a people question for you, and I would love to get all of your opinions on this. So there are a lot of people here who are at various stages of learning about the blockchain and learning about Bitcoin. And many different political opinions, many different assumptions, many different education levels, many different experiences with money themselves personally, and the emotional charge that comes with it, with money, right? How do you, when you meet somebody new and you want to talk about your business, whether it's talking to them as a potential partner, an employee, a customer, an investor, how do you come to a meeting of minds in the fastest way possible so that you can qualify?
Anyone want to take a stab at that? Go ahead, Connie.
Probably we all encounter this, right, every day, but I feel like what I'm doing with BitGive is probably more so like a mainstream audience and, talking to people, but, also my family or something like that would also be relevant to us all. Usually what I say is that exactly what, I forget who was saying earlier, I think it was Ted, it's digital cash. And that, similar to like when you go into a 7-Eleven and you buy a stick of gum, you hand them the dollar or whatever it is, and you walk away with your gum, they have their dollar, they don't know who you are, they don't know anything about you, except for maybe the video camera in case you did something wrong, but so it's essentially an anonymous transaction, but it has to happen in person with physical money. And what Bitcoin provides is that in a digital way, in a cryptographically secure way, and on a global scale, peer-to-peer, instantly. So it's like it just blows open your transaction of buying a stick of gum to global e-commerce, right? And I think that to me that makes sense to almost anyone. And then if they seem interested, then I do try to take them to the next level, which is that this is just the first app on a technology that is blockchain that this is built upon, and that there's a public ledger that every transaction is posted to once it's confirmed, and it may be pseudo-anonymous, but it's actually quite transparent, and you can go farther into it, but usually I start with the digital cash.
So one factoid you might find interesting, which I don't know that I've ever said publicly before, is we have lots and lots of contracted teller partners for Abra in different countries. We have contracted teller partners who still don't know that they are physically holding Bitcoin when they install Abra software. They haven't needed to know, and it actually, in a lot of cases, would be confusing for that particular partner. And we have partners, by the way, who specifically working with Abra because of the way we are using Bitcoin. And so they couldn't be further opposite on the spectrum. And so it's amazing to me going from country to country. I just was in Dubai and Shanghai and Mumbai and Manila in the past 2 months, and every conversation is different. Some people get a headache when you go down that hole of how it works, and some people explicitly want to work with you because of how it works.
It sounds like you're saying, I have a genome, but I couldn't tell you what it is.
I mean, it's like selling, I'll go back to the TCP/IP analogy from earlier, right? I mean, you obviously know this very well from our Netscape days, but, when you were a ISP convincing people to use a browser versus AOL, it wasn't because of TCP/IP. It was because of what they could do on an open internet browser. But there were still people, and I remember also Windows 3.11 was different because you actually had to manually install TCP/IP, which is crazy, but there's still people who were fascinated with how it worked behind the scenes, even though that may have been 15% of the early internet users, right? So everybody's different, and I think that there's a lot of people who are only going to get it because of the problems that it solves. And that's perfectly fine, because if it doesn't solve enough problems for enough people, like I said, it's going to die anyway.
Very quickly, I've despaired of trying to explain Bitcoin to anybody, and I'll tell you, from the first Bitcoin conference I went to, the first people I talked to, it was like, how are we going to better explain Bitcoin? A lot of people have tried, and it's really not doable. But one thing.
My dad is coming out here this weekend, so I'm actually looking for a way to tell him what I do for a living.
Don't.
You make software for a living.
No, but here's my own personal experience. Wences was interested in getting me to work for Zappo, and trying to get me to understand Bitcoin, and I was going through my own pregnancy, and he asked. I told him I was going down to Starbucks, and he said, "Can you get me a chai tea latte?" I said, "Sure." And so I came back, and he said, "Let me pay for it." I said, "No, don't pay me, don't pay me." So I sat down at my desk, and suddenly an email arrived from his Zappo account saying, "Thanks for the chai tea latte, 0.03 Bitcoin." And I was like, what the hell is that? Can't be real. This is not real money. I don't have an account with him. How does this all work? But I've never forgotten that. I still have that email. So my point is, a lot of times what I do is I take people out to lunch, I let them pay, and then I pay them back by sending them Bitcoin. And if you do that, and then you also send maybe a couple of links to a couple of very good articles, you've done more than you could ever do by explaining.
Seriously, all you need to go is to go on YouTube, you'll find 10-year-old kids, talking about Bitcoin and studying how. Sorry, I can't hear.
Yep, I've done this a couple of times. I usually take people to Coupa Cafe. It's a popular coffee shop near Stanford campus in Palo Alto. And it's one of the coffee shops where they encourage people to pay with Bitcoin. And I show the simple transaction, and it might seem like, hey, you can do this with PayPal or something else. And then when we get back to our office, I use blockchain or Panelist or one of these platforms and show how millions of these transactions are now on this large public record. And show that one particular interaction in the context of the entire world that blockchain and Bitcoin has created. And that usually blows people's minds because they see something that happened in the physical world being explained with a lot of technology and innovation that has happened in the back, enabling unique properties that manifest in that one interaction.
Can I just add, you can also make a donation to BitGive. It's a really great way to show people how to use Bitcoin.
I have a question for Ted and this gentleman, I believe it's Bill. from Abra. I guess you just got I just read on TechCrunch you got a ton of money for doing what you guys are doing. When I got involved with Bitcoin about 2.5 years ago, I'd met Roger Ver, and he suggested I read the Satoshi paper. When I read it, all I found out was a Byzantine general's problem being solved mathematically. My question is,
That's how you define pregnancy, by the way.
Okay. Today I heard a new word, called digital cash. 2 years ago I heard gold, digital gold, and gold, both are down. So now we are talking about blockchain. So would you say blockchains are cattle futures, gold futures, or what do you see a future for blockchain in that respect?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question.
So are we now talking about the blockchain being the technology and Bitcoin, like I know someone who threw in $19 million, and I think it's probably now $2.5 or $3 million worth of Bitcoin in his portfolio. So what I'm trying to say is, are people going to be working? There's a lot of human capital working on the blockchain right now, which is incredible. The last I heard was about 30 or 40,000 people. So obviously there's something happening there. But what is the future of Bitcoin per se? How do you people tend to see it? Whether do you really see it going up or just not? That's actually my question.
Yeah, well, I don't think I should be the only one to answer this because I know my bias is very different. I see a huge future for Bitcoin and blockchain tied together. I don't see a huge future for just generic blockchain technology. Even if you're enabling titles on the internet, it will probably be through some type of Bitcoin-based blockchain or sidechain. I think that the best future that I can see for Bitcoin is as a reserve currency enabling the transactions that we need that aren't possible today. That's my personal opinion and bias, right? Because today, I think we're 50 to 75 years away from having a completely level playing field on planet Earth at best, right? And so you're still going to have governments manipulating currencies to gain an advantage until that's not necessary anymore, which is at least 75 to 100 years away, right? At that point, a truly consumer-facing, decentralized brand could be very interesting, but until then, I think you're going to need dollars and euros and pesos and yen, whether it's consumer to consumer or consumer to business or business to business, makes no difference. However, as I've said, you can enable amazing transactions that aren't possible today using Bitcoin and blockchain technology, even if you're representing underlying fiat, which is like what Abra's doing. And I think other companies will eventually figure it out. I think we're the first, but other companies will eventually figure it out as well. And other people who are doing real dollars are actually storing dollars in a vault in parallel to using Bitcoin, which to a certain degree defeats the purpose. So I think the reserve currency applications of Bitcoin and the blockchain go into the trillions of dollars.
Just adding a separate take to that in agreement, the smart thing in my mind would be to take a portion of one's portfolio that they don't mind losing and invest in Bitcoin. And typically what we see is, whether it's hedge funds or family offices or whatever that are investing in Bitcoin, they're basically saying, listen, this is an asymmetric outcome. Either it's going to zero, and I put the chances of Bitcoin going to zero, I agree with our CEO, Wences, I think it's probably 20%. We're going through this social experiment right now. Money is a social technology. I think it's very unlikely it goes to zero, but I think there's a greater than 50% chance that it goes to $100,000, $500,000 Bitcoin. That will take 10 to 15 years. But given that there's that much upside, I personally have put a given amount of my net worth into Bitcoin, willing to lose it all. And I believe that probably it's going to be rewarded very, very handsomely. To Bill's point, even if Bitcoin as a currency is not used widely, and I think it will be, to use the blockchain or the Bitcoin blockchain or a sidechain related to the Bitcoin blockchain, you have to use Bitcoin. So what that, you can think of it as like a Bitcoin or a piece of Bitcoin as a stamp that is required to enter data on the blockchain. That's a shitload of stamps people are going to have to buy when we really start disintermediating a lot of the services that are out there.
By the way, that's what he just said is how we're using Bitcoin at Abra, right? So we actually fix the value in fiat using the stamp he's talking about to store scripts or smart contracts that represent a contract between two parties on the blockchain to fix the Bitcoin value in fiat, right? You as a consumer don't see that it's happening, but that's what we're doing.
So how do you translate currency? How do you translate currency valuations in that respect?
I wouldn't even begin to want to answer that because I would monopolize the next 15 minutes. So I'm just going to punt on that and say find me afterwards, and I'd be happy to pontificate eloquently on how we do that.
Let me jump in here also and say, you know, obviously Bitcoin's very speculative. It could go to zero. It possibly will drop in the next, you know, month or two. It's possible for us to give you financial advice. But what I can say is when you buy a Bitcoin and you have it in your hot little hands in your wallet and your Zappa wallet or wherever you decide to put it, it makes it a very more real thing for you, right? When you go hard on the money, it matters. And like when somebody was asking, how do I get involved in Bitcoin? What I always say is go buy a Bitcoin, right? It ain't the easiest thing in the world to do, but you can do it, and you can do it within the course of like an industrious day, possibly even faster. But yeah, or asks for one. But the most important thing is the buying of it and the owning of it starts making it matter in a way that, like every single one of us who are totally obsessed with Bitcoin, we all began by buying it. Or mining it, yes, but do not go into mining. That's not where you're starting. Trust me on that. We're kind of running out of time, and I do want to be respectful of everybody's desire to meet each other and network. Maybe we'll take one or two more questions. You are literally, you're the light for me. So.
I'm Andre. You mentioned a number of technical challenges that are facing Bitcoin and resource challenges like bandwidth, computation, electricity. So will it make or break Bitcoin and the blockchain system, or will it rather go to increasing these resources on the internet?
Does anyone want to tackle that, or maybe I'll answer that really quick. No, it won't. So Bitcoin, the way you think about it is all Bitcoins are distributed in a pie, and that pie, each one of the mining machines that you run represents one portion of that pie. So if you ran 10% of the network, you get 10% of the Bitcoins. If the equation looks like if I am spending more electricity than I am making, I literally just unplug my machine, right? So there is an equilibrium that Bitcoin will always hit. Obviously, I say that with a whole bunch of asterisks because the how you manage a commodity in a moving market is, once again, very difficult to explain in 30 seconds or less. But the capacity problem also is being solved in lots of interesting ways. It's not just about block size, it's about what you move on chain and what you move off chain. Also, all the limitations of Bitcoin are not stopping the evolution of it. They're pointing smart people at interesting problems, which is always how we get better technology. And then there's a question immediately behind you.
Okay. So I love the optimism here. I'm extremely optimistic about Bitcoin and technology. And obviously, the technology itself, I can't put it back in the bottle. But I want to know what keeps you up at night. What is the scenario where you think something may cripple or kill Bitcoin? And if Bitcoin does get crippled or die, will that be the death of permissionless ledgers and perhaps be the rise of permission?
Anybody want to tackle that one?
Maybe everybody can give a quick thing. I don't know if it means the death of Bitcoin, and I don't think it does, but the thing that keeps me up at night is compliance. It is everybody goes through the 5 stages of grief with compliance. First, you deny that you have to do it. There's no way I could never comply with all this stuff. Then you get angry, then you get sad, and eventually you accept it. So we accept it and we have to do it, but the reality is that compliance makes onboarding and the user experience of getting into Bitcoin difficult, and it's slowing down the rate of adoption. So that keeps me up at night, but it's not the death of Bitcoin.
I would say honestly there are things that concern me about how long it's going to take, but I don't really think it's going to go away. So I ultimately don't lose any sleep over it at all. I think it's more just about like the block size debate. It's scaling issues. It's just in general mainstream adoption and understanding the technology. All those kinds of things. All are hurdles that are easily crossed. It's just a matter of how and when, and I don't know, patience. I need more patience.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that I see is Zappo is a little different than the other wallets because they really provide that cold storage mechanism that I might as a more of a master's PhD type would want to have. Most people don't want that. However, if you actually look back at the original writings, referring to now, it's only been 6 years as original writings, and you talk to some people who are still tangentially involved, who were part of that cypherpunk community, they're very anti-hosted wallet, right? They give you that Mt. Gox stuff pretty religiously when it comes to hosted wallets, and trust me, I get it, right? It's kind of like the equivalent of a bank without the FDIC, and nobody left holding the bag, right? That's a big problem. That's a really big problem. Because if you forget about like what Abra does and just look at Bitcoin as a consumer-facing currency, there's a real issue between people using it the way it was originally intended and people hosting wallets online, which creates the compliance complexity that Ted was referring to, right? If you're running open source Bitcoin software on your computer, and in theory handing $100 to somebody who sends you Bitcoin within FinCEN's guidance, they even have guidance for that, by the way, that is not a regulated transaction where anybody has to have a license. It's regulated in the sense that you can't do more than a certain amount before you'd have to register with FinCEN, but if you stay well under that amount, you don't actually have to register with anyone, and any reasonable lawyer will tell you that. Actually, with the exception of the state of New York, who in their infinite wisdom actually outlawed the ability to do a person-to-person transaction in exchange for cash and Bitcoin without becoming a licensed money transfer. So with the exception of New York, right, you can actually run the open source software. But the question becomes, is that providing enough utility at large scale, or do we have to run in this compliance-rich environment where we rely on third parties and reintroduce financial intermediaries into the digital cash system to make it look more like the traditional banking system? I'm not so sure that that's the best way forward for people to use Bitcoin and take advantage of all the decentralized aspects of what the system gives you. And I don't have the answer to that, by the way. I just know that it's a big problem.
No, there's definitely there's a trade-off between the trustlessness and the ease of use, and if we can get the ease of use into trustlessness, that will be the killer.
That's right.
So I think what keeps me up at night is the power of the technology and the fact that it is apolitical, so it can be used in either direction. So some refer to the use for the vice industries like gambling as being a negative application, and I actually think it's really positive to see the vice industries using the technology because they have the most to gain financially in the short term of more efficient applications of payment and transaction processing. But what really has the potential to happen that could be a negative application is the fact that it's such a transparent system and that there's just a greater wealth of data and what people are doing with their money, with their capital, and where their priorities are, that the potential to apply that nefariously certainly exists, and the technology is really powerful and will be used to the ultimate extreme for good, but potentially in the other direction too, especially as it applies to privacy issues. So the developer debates around this, I think, is actually the most interesting and will be where the decisions made there will be the ones that are most powerfully felt in 5, 10, and 15 years.
Technology is at its best when you don't notice it, and technologies which are very mature are hardly noticeable. Example, phones in your hands. Every phone packs so much of technology that if you want to understand really the internals of your smartphone, it's a lot harder than understanding the blockchain Bitcoin protocol. And my concern is that while Bitcoin will definitely go towards and reach this level of maturity, it has to survive that hard journey, And once it has this type of broad mandate of adoption and innovation, there's no stopping. And that's what really keeps me up in the night.
There's one more question, I think.
The underlying software, I don't know how many people in this room have ever read the source code. I got the source code, compiled it, just to understand the algorithms. But the underlying technology doesn't mean that, I see this panel which is evangelistic about Bitcoin, but I mean, there could be any digital currency. It doesn't matter what it is. And so you really get into the question, what is the currency and what about the alternatives? And the other question I wanted to ask was, she said there's 6.5 billion people going to be enabled. Well, if you got Gates selling you a cell phone in Africa, trying to do microtransactions, why do I care about the 6.5 billion that aren't really contributing to the economy right now? And how are they going to get any Bitcoins unless they're trading labor or tools or something like that, or get into the game?
The first question, I think, related to why Bitcoin versus other digital currencies. And the short answer to that is a network effect. A year ago, 50% of all virtual currency transactions were Bitcoin. Today, it's about 94 to 96%. To me, this is just my personal opinion, the game's over. You can mess around with alternative currencies for certain niche uses, but Bitcoin is one. There might be people that come up, there are certainly better email protocols than the ones we're using, and you can come up with them relatively quickly, but you're not going to get however many billion people are currently using email to switch, and I think we're already at that point with Bitcoin. So that's a network effect. Regarding financial inclusion, maybe other people on the panel are better equipped to answer that, but I just think that it's hard to predict the upside and the benefits once you begin to include people and give them an easy store of value and an easy method of transacting. Right now, the internet for many billions of people is a look but can't touch thing. Buy anything on it. They can't actually transact on the internet. Bitcoin allows them to do that.
So I had a very intense conversation with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau this morning about what financial inclusion means. Okay. Typically people who are in the government, and I have a lot of friends at USAID and CFPB, who hearts are in the right places, but to them financial inclusion is very much a bank mentality mindset. Ultimately, financial inclusion that matters is about access to commerce. It's not access to a bank account and let me tell you, I spent a year of my life going back and forth between Miami and Haiti trying to bank tens of thousands of people who ultimately just didn't give a shit. And our hearts were in the right places. They took the accounts, they withdrew the money, and they went about their day, okay? And it took years before the people would ultimately understand the value of having an account. But if you say, I'm enabling you now to sell a product that you couldn't sell before to make money, they'll sit up and listen. And so when you talk about cross-border commerce or enabling what you might call microtransactions outside of the US or in developing markets, you're talking about enabling trillions of dollars of applications that are either really expensive, really hard, or is downright impossible today, right? And that's the value of what this technology can eventually do, in my opinion. And that's why we started Avro, was to not enable people to have bank accounts, but was to give people access to new forms of commerce.
So your point about the populations in the developing and emerging countries not contributing to the economy is actually quite hard to hear. I think that they're really lacking access to resources, and I don't know if you saw the video earlier, but the potential to provide resources and access to financial services unlocks the potential of those billions of people who are unable to right now maybe get the studies because they don't have water, get the jobs because they're not educated, because they're spending their day getting water. There's a lot of things that people in this world have to offer that are unfortunately right now being squashed or squandered, or we're not even aware of what they are. So I think being able to access them and provide them with resources and financial services, or just the way that BitGive is functioning in providing resources to them using the technology and allowing the funding to get there faster and more securely and more of it to be used for the cause versus fees to Western Union, or the principal of that school having to go stand in line waiting and then give them 13% of the funding. I mean, all of those things are very powerful things, and they empower the human race. So I really, I encourage you to think about that a little bit more and perhaps watch the video again.
Also, I think just to say it in a slightly different way, I think it's not even access to resources. Actually, Africa, for instance, is a very resource-rich country that we're incredibly dependent upon, and there's certainly that's certainly already been shown in terms of international relationships developing and trade exchange. But in fact, what folks need to contribute is just tools to be able to monetize properly their resources. They don't need, and when we introduce the proper tools, they get it. So if we give them something that they don't need, they're not gonna get it, nor adopt. And if we provide something that is a true tool for them, immediately it's adopted. This is why M-Pesa was so powerful, and that was actually developed there, right? A developed market didn't bring that to Kenya. So I think this is the power of blockchain technology. It's agnostic, it's apolitical, and it's a tool that can be used in emerging and domestic markets to engage in cross-market trade, and so that people can surface the value and monetize the resources they have.
Yeah, and I think this was brought up earlier in the panel discussion. I feel the type of rights that a technology like Bitcoin brings to, especially the underbanked, underdeveloped parts of the world, include right to communicate and right to engage in economic transactions. And while not all countries, not all sovereigns recognize these rights in the same way, technology is agnostic. Technology is agnostic of the sovereign, your place, and type of governance you're in, and therefore guarantees some of these fundamental human rights that we all in the free world recognize, and make them available to other parts of the world where they may not be enforced in the same spirit and rigor that we enforce here in the free world.
Well, let's just do one final. I'm going to give the panel one final opportunity to say. One more question, but yeah. we got to make it fast because I think we're running out of energy.
All right, thank you. My name is Richie. Actually, I come to the question for whole panel, each of you. So I want you just, other than that, blockchain. So that for the technology side, for the application, except for the bitcoins, could each of you nominate one area which you think that the technology or the concept of all things behind the Bitcoin can be used, and also why it hasn't been used? What's the issue should be solved before that? Especially, I take this question to Alice because you mentioned the last 6 months you saw a lot of application already started in other than the Bitcoin area. Thanks.
That's a two-wording. I can do that in 2 words.
Go for it.
Contract automation. Contract automation of any sort. You can enforce contracts technically rather than needing a third party, which is how we've been enforcing contracts in the past. We don't need that anymore.
So let's use this as we pass along as a sort of opportunity to say last words, and then this is what I think is most exciting.
And I would like to see more healthcare use cases leveraging this technology. There have been some startups who have been tracking, but I want to see more of those.
I think empowerment of individual creators and producers. So for instance, one application I've seen is empowerment of content creators and the ability for them to enforce and automate their own contracts technically.
So I would say the transparency model that we're just now embarking upon, and then also actually Kamesh was alluding to, and I should have mentioned earlier, is another application we'd like to look at for blockchain tech in the nonprofit sector is the transfer of confidential health data and health records and information in partnership with Medic Mobile. So we're initiating conversations with them about that, but they're an NGO working in healthcare in 21 different countries around the world, and very much trying to tackle that issue of how do you transfer that very sensitive data in a much more efficient and secure way.
I think there's a bunch that I'm particularly interested in, but I think there are three that are worth mentioning. Obviously, money transfer being the most important for Abra, but beyond that, I think there are two that are particularly valuable to the planet. The first is finally getting rid of the root authority model in SSL, which has become a huge problem for the internet. The trust layer of issuing certificates for public-private key encryption is now in the hands of a very small number of people, which is a big problem. And I think that the blockchain and Bitcoin specifically can address that using a smart contract-based model. It's a complicated discussion, but I think it's a big problem that can be addressed. And the second one, or the third one, I guess, is IoT, Internet of Things applications. I'm on the advisory board of a company called SI, which is the largest cellular M2M network on the planet, and we're working with M-Kopa in Kenya to basically enable PAYGO applications, which I think is a huge intersection between what Abra's doing and IoT applications, so that people can get things like refrigerators, stoves, televisions, and actually put those devices on the internet, pay for them using digital currency, and the device will go on or off depending upon whether or not they've made their payment, with no banking system required whatsoever to process those transactions. And so you basically have integrated different grids into one actual amazing network now, which can enable all kinds of interesting things for billions of people.
I care about Bitcoin, the currency. I believe in it, but that's not as simple as it sounds, because what Bill just said is part of it. I think machine-to-machine payments is going to be extraordinary, and the big innovation with Uber is that they hide the payments. When I get in that car, I don't have to worry about, what's this meter? Do I got to tip this guy? It's hidden from the process, and I think that's going to happen across the board using Bitcoin and machine-to-machine payments. That said, the other thing is identity. Gentleman mentioned voting. I think the ability to control our identity and reveal it when we want to online, and for third parties to be able to verify it and trust it in things like voting and online voting it would be very, very important.
Absolutely. Well, let's just take this opportunity to thank the panel. It's been really, really... What a pleasure it was to have everybody here. This was an incredible turnout, and I hope this was a fruitful conversation for everybody. For those of you who are new to Bitcoin, find somebody who is sitting next to you who probably knows a lot more and geek out about it. Like we said, it's a rabbit hole. So thank you again, everybody.